Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I had been holding my breath for the past hour, waiting to arrive at the opulent opera house that now functioned as a venue for events like these. Elena's big day, her book launch, and gala. It was, of course, a sight to behold. The marble floors, the grand chandeliers, the elegantly dressed people milling about like they were walking in a magazine spread. The air felt thick with all the prestige, the success, the glamour. I couldn't help but feel like I was about to stand out in all the wrong ways. I'm Hannah Voss, 36 years old, once a renowned disaster rescue pilot, now a semi-retired instructor at a flight academy. I've seen things most people would never want to imagine, let alone experience, but none of that prepared me for what awaited me at this gala. The cold stares, the hushed whispers, the feeling of being a total outsider. I stepped out of the cab in my crisp pilot uniform. I'd worn it proudly, with all the flight pins on my jacket, the pins that signified years of dangerous missions, heroic rescues, lives saved. But at this moment, all they seemed to do was draw attention. The cold kind. I had only come to support Elena, to show her I cared, even if we hadn't spoken in 5 years. The last time we talked, it ended with her dismissing my career as just flying tin cans, as if my life's work was nothing more than a glorified hobby. But I couldn't hold that against her. Not now. As I walked through the grand entrance, heads turned, but not in admiration. The looks I received were colder than I'd anticipated. Even my mother avoided my gaze, her eyes flitting around nervously as if I wasn't really there. I felt the weight of her silence, heavy and uncomfortable. It wasn't like she could pretend to be happy to see me. I walked past people in sharp tuxedos, elegant gowns, and meticulously styled hair. The contrast of my uniform felt like a slap in the face. As I moved through the crowd, I couldn't help but think that I didn't belong here. That, for whatever reason, I was the unwelcome guest at my own sister's big night. I could feel Elena before I even saw her. Her presence seemed to dominate the room as she floated through the red carpet, her eyes hidden behind dark glasses. She was glowing, radiant in the spotlight, her best-selling novel hanging over her head like a golden halo. And then, just as I expected, her gaze flicked over to mine. Her smile was razor-sharp, the kind that cut through the air, and for a brief moment, our eyes locked. I didn't see a welcoming look there, no recognition of the years I'd spent trying to reach out, just the cold, calculated smile of someone who had long ago accepted their place in the world while leaving others, like me, behind. As she made her way to the stage, I stood frozen, trying to shake off the sting of that smile. The room was buzzing with excitement, but there was a palpable tension when Elena began her speech. She took the microphone and with a wave of her hand began to speak, her voice smooth and confident. I could feel the crowd's energy shift, the air thickening as they all leaned in to hear what she had to say. She smiled, her eyes flicking over the audience, and then she did it. Elena, in her perfect, calm voice, casually tossed out a backhanded compliment that landed like a slap. "I'm so happy to be surrounded by real success tonight. You know, some people," she glanced over at me with a cool smile, "just cling to their old costumes, their outdated careers. But hey, they try, right?" Laughter erupted from the crowd. I felt a deep, burning heat rise to my cheeks, but I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stood there, glass of water in hand, trying to steady my breathing. It was nothing new. The mocking, the quiet dismissal, the subtle reminders that I was just the failed pilot in the room. My fingers brushed over the old emblem tattoo on my wrist, the one I had gotten years ago after a dangerous rescue mission where I had flown blind, risking everything to save a group of stranded mountaineers. The tattoo was the only real reminder of that night, a mark of my heroism that no one here would ever understand. Elena's speech continued as if nothing had happened, and I remained silent. I couldn't bring myself to reply. But the words lingered in the air, stinging, cutting deeper than I cared to admit. I had come to support her, but instead, I was the joke, the punchline, a failure clinging to memories of a life she could never understand. It was then that I realized something deep inside me was shifting. The quiet hurt, the silent sting of being overlooked, was no longer something I could swallow down and forget. No, it was time for something to change. I set my glass down with a quiet click. My gaze didn't leave the stage, but my mind was already elsewhere. I could feel the change coming, as inevitable as the sunrise. And in that moment, as Elena continued her speech, the crowd laughing along with her words. I knew this was just the beginning. Something had broken, and I wasn't going to let it go unnoticed any longer. I was halfway through my glass of water when the venue doors swung open, drawing the attention of every person in the room. A group of men walked in, their presence commanding the kind of attention that made the air feel heavier. They were dressed in crisp uniforms, their badges shining in the spotlight, and their gait, confident, assured, spoke of experience that only those who had seen real danger could possess. My heart skipped a beat when I saw the man leading the group, Captain Rowan Tate, the man I had saved all those years ago during a storm rescue, the man whose life I'd risked my own to save. It had been over 5 years since that rescue mission in the mountains, but I could still remember it like it was yesterday. The freezing winds, the blinding snow, the ice that cracked beneath our feet as we struggled to navigate the storm, my hand guiding the helicopter, steady, focused. But in the end, it was Rowan's life that I had saved, his team, his mission. Rowan's gaze swept over the room, stopping for a brief second when it landed on me. His face lit up, a grin breaking across his weathered features. He raised a hand in a salute, his eyes holding mine in a silent acknowledgement of what had passed between us, something deeper than words. The room fell silent, all eyes shifted from Rowan to me. I felt a heat rising in my chest, the blood rushing to my ears. I wasn't sure if they could hear my heartbeat in that quiet room, but I could. It was loud, thudding against my ribcage, fast, erratic, and then, without a word, Rowan stepped forward. He walked toward me, his boots echoing on the marble floor, each step like a drumbeat that signified something bigger than just a reunion between old comrades. It felt like vindication, validation. When he reached me, he didn't just offer a handshake. No. Rowan Tate, captain of the International Disaster Response Unit, stood tall in front of me, and without hesitation, he saluted. He wasn't just saluting me as a fellow soldier or as a person he knew. He was saluting me as the woman who had risked her life for him, for his team, and for others in the storm. The room was still, not a single word spoken. But the silence wasn't awkward. It was reverent. And then, one by one, the other pilots in his group followed suit. Each of them raised a hand in salute, acknowledging the life I had saved. Their faces, familiar but distant, softened as they nodded toward me, their expressions full of respect, full of understanding. Elena, standing at the center of the room near the stage, was frozen. I saw her smile falter, the glass of champagne in her hand slipping slightly as her grip loosened. Her eyes widened in disbelief as she watched the room shift in my direction. She looked uncomfortable, unsettled. The spotlight that had once been entirely hers was now shared, and I didn't even have to say a word. The recognition of my sacrifice was louder than any speech, any accolades. It wasn't a performance, it wasn't a carefully crafted narrative or something to be flaunted for applause. It was real. The room had gone from the chatter of the gala to a hushed reverence, and as Rowan lowered his salute, he stepped back. His eyes never left mine. I stood tall, returning the salute with a simple nod. I didn't need to say anything. I didn't need to prove anything. But when I looked back at Elena, her frozen smile now a tight-lipped grimace, I realized something I hadn't seen in a long time. My sister was no longer the golden child. Not in this room. Not with these people. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I belonged. I had made my mark. The recognition wasn't for her. It wasn't about her, and it wasn't about the years I had spent in her shadow. It was about the sacrifice I had made, the lives I had saved, the danger I had faced alone, without anyone watching. And now, here in this room, the people who mattered, the people who knew the value of my actions, had given me the respect I deserved. I stood there for a moment longer, taking in the quiet reverence of it all. And then, I did something I hadn't done in years. I smiled. Elena's face twisted, and I could see the way her lips pressed into a thin line. The crowd around us had fallen silent, and though I felt no need to rub it in, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't her night anymore. It was mine. I looked away, letting the moment linger. Before I quietly excused myself from the crowd, Elena would have her turn to speak again. She'd have the chance to reclaim her spotlight, but for now, I had finally earned mine. The gala had come and gone, but the moment with Rowan and the others lingered in my mind, vivid and undeniable. I wasn't sure if the feeling of vindication would stick, but it was still there as I drove back to the quiet of my home, the soft hum of the car engine filling the space around me. I couldn't shake the memory of Rowan's salute, the weight of it on my chest. But there was something else too, something deeper. The past, that rescue mission, that night. I closed my eyes briefly, letting the memory flood back. It had been 5 years ago, a year after I left active duty as a pilot, when Rowan and his team had been stranded in the mountains. No one else would fly in that storm. It wasn't just a bad weather night. It was the kind of night pilots called suicide. It was the worst storm of the season. The wind so fierce it could rip a helicopter apart if it wasn't being flown with absolute precision. But I knew something others didn't. I knew that I had a chance to save them. Even with no GPS, no working radar, the storm closing in, I could feel it in my bones. My crew wasn't going to make it, but we would. We could. It wasn't the right call. In fact, the right call would have been to turn back. But I was too far into the mission, and the idea of them dying without me even trying, that wasn't something I could live with. I made the decision. I pushed on. I remember the sound of the helicopter blades cutting through the howling wind. I remember the flashes of light from the storm illuminating the black sky, only to vanish again in the next second. My heart was racing in my chest as I guided the chopper through the storm, the world spinning around us in a whirl of ice and darkness. My two co-pilots were holding on for dear life, their faces pale, their eyes wide with fear. But I kept the controls steady. I kept my focus on the endgame, getting them out. I knew the storm was going to eat us alive, but if I made one mistake, just one, it would be over. And then came the moment when I had to make the hardest decision I'd ever made. The ice was too thick. The path we were following, the one I'd marked from memory in the haze of panic, was now impossible. The winds were so violent that they were tearing the helicopter apart, and the whine of the engine had become a haunting sound I can still hear in my head. In that moment, I could have turned back. I could have aborted the mission and saved myself. But I thought of Rowan and his team. Trapped in that mountain pass, miles away from civilization. There wasn't time for second guessing. I had to do it. I grabbed my survival kit and broke a seal on the emergency beacon, carefully using my blood to mark the escape route. My hand was shaking with the cold, but I used the tip of the pen to mark a clear path on the ice. If we didn't make it, at least someone would know what happened. At least someone would find the others. In a swift, calculated move, I gripped the controls and carved a path through the snow, the wind howling louder, the ice biting at my skin as the chopper descended. The world around us seemed to vanish in that storm. There was no visibility. It was just me and the wind, and a promise I couldn't break. I didn't know how I did it. I didn't know how I kept my hands steady when every instinct screamed to stop, but we landed. I'll never forget the way Rowan looked when we touched down. He was alive. They were alive. The moment he saw me, he staggered toward me, drenched in sweat despite the freezing temperatures, and muttered one word, barely audible over the wind. "Thank you." There was no applause, no thank you speech, no fanfare. Just a man who had survived, a team of rescuers, and the bitter taste of the storm in my lungs. But none of that mattered now. What mattered, what I had come to understand over the years, was the cost. The cost of my decision. The weight of the mission had stayed with me, even as I quietly retired from flying and tried to focus on teaching. The weight of knowing how close we came to dying. How close they came to not having a chance at all. I had earned my tattoos, the emblem on my wrist, the one I had inked after that mission, but more importantly, I had earned a sense of peace, the kind that comes only after knowing you gave everything you had, even when no one saw it, except, of course, Rowan. I thought of him again, of his salute, and of how it had shattered the walls that had been built between me and my family, between me and Elena. Back at the gala, I could feel the old wounds bubbling to the surface. Elena's mockery, her dismissal of my life's work, the coldness of my mother's silence. But Rowan's presence had done something I hadn't expected. It had put everything into perspective. It was never about fitting into their world. It was never about Elena's idea of success. It was about doing the right thing when no one else would. It was about being seen by the people who mattered. Rowan and the other pilots saw me for who I really was. And that was enough. I didn't need them to understand. I didn't need my family's approval anymore. I parked the car in front of my house and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet calm wash over me. I had come here to prove something to Elena, but maybe it wasn't for her after all. Maybe it was for me. I stood up from the car and walked toward the door, my mind already on the next step. I stayed at my mother's house that night, the tension still hanging heavy in the air. Elena's gala had been a spectacle of mockery, and as much as I tried to shake it off, it lingered. The weight of my sister's words, failed pilot clinging to costumes, echoed in my head, rattling around as I lay in the guest room, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't sleep. I didn't want to. I'd hoped that coming back here would somehow feel different, that time had healed whatever rift had formed between me and my family over the years. But as I glanced around at the old photos on the walls, all of Elena, my mother's proud smile beside her, the framed newspaper clippings of her book launches, her bestseller list, I realized that nothing had changed. I was still the afterthought, the one who didn't fit, the one who wasn't part of their glossy picture. The next morning, I found myself in the kitchen, making a pot of coffee, trying to find some semblance of normalcy. My mother bustled around, humming to herself as she went about her usual routine. But there was something off. I could feel her avoiding my gaze, as if the silence from last night had settled between us and she didn't know how to break it. I filled a mug and set it down in front of her. She looked up at me, startled. "Morning," I said softly, forcing a smile. "I made coffee." "Thanks," she replied, but there was a distance in her voice, a hesitation that made me realize she wasn't fully present. Something was off. I took a seat at the table, watching her, waiting for her to say something. The silence stretched long between us before she finally spoke. "You know," she began, her eyes still avoiding mine, "I'm proud of Elena. She's done so much with her life. She's worked hard." "I know," I said quietly, knowing exactly where this conversation was headed. "She's done well." My mother looked down at her hands, wringing the napkin in her lap. "She's worked hard for what she's achieved. But you?" She paused like she was choosing her words carefully. "You've been—" Her voice trailed off. "You've been stuck, Hannah? You never really moved on from your flying days? I don't know if you're trying to prove something or if you just—" Her words stung more than I expected. It was as if everything I had done, all the lives I had saved, all the years spent risking my life, had amounted to nothing. I was still the failure in her eyes, still the one who couldn't get it together. "You think I'm stuck?" I asked, my voice shaky despite my efforts to keep it steady. My mother set the napkin down, her eyes finally meeting mine. "It's not that. It's just, you need to let go of all this. You don't even talk about it. You don't even share any of your experiences with us. It's like you're holding on to this old identity that you won't let go of. It's—" She sighed. "It's time to move on." I couldn't speak at first. The words were stuck in my throat. My entire life, my entire career, was being dismissed with a few simple sentences. It wasn't just Elena anymore. It was my mother too. The woman who had raised me, the woman who should have understood, was just as blind to my sacrifices as my sister. "I don't think you understand," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "You don't understand what it's like to risk everything and then be told it doesn't matter. You don't know what it's like to fight for a life you're proud of, only to have everyone around you act like it's a joke." Her eyes softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "It's just, you're not a pilot anymore, Hannah. You're not that person anymore. It's time to let it go." And then, as if my words had never even mattered, she added, "I'm just saying you should think about what's best for you, for your future, and maybe that doesn't include your old uniform." It hit me like a punch in the gut. I was no longer the daughter they were proud of. I was just the person who couldn't fit into the picture they wanted. I stood up from the table, the chair scraping against the tile floor as I did. "I need to go for a walk." I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair and left the house without another word. I couldn't look at her anymore. The weight of the betrayal was too much. The family that should have understood me had never seen me. They'd never seen me for what I truly was. Someone who had sacrificed everything for the job she loved, for the lives she saved. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to face it. But in that moment, standing in the cold air outside my mother's house, I understood what I had to do. I didn't belong in this family anymore. The walk didn't clear my head. Instead, it gave me space to think, to process, to remember everything I had given up for them. And then, a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. Something I hadn't wanted to admit to myself. I'd been used. All these years, I had been used. My career had been a tool for them, something they could exploit when they needed something. My money, my time, my efforts, all of it had been taken, and I hadn't even realized it until now. But then something else happened. A truth settled in the pit of my stomach. I didn't need them anymore. I had built a life without them, one that was defined by my own accomplishments, and now I was going to make sure they knew it. That afternoon, I went through every email I had, every record of the money I'd sent, the support I'd given. I didn't need their validation anymore, and I certainly didn't need to keep paying for their mistakes. I wasn't going to let them continue using me. I started to pull everything together, preparing the evidence I needed, the evidence that would expose their betrayal. And when I found the smoking gun, the digital trail that led straight to Elena, everything changed. I had proof that Elena, my sister, had been the one behind the anonymous complaint that had destroyed my career in the aviation corps. I stared at the screen, the realization settling into my bones. She had done this. She had sabotaged me, out of jealousy, out of spite. But this time, I wasn't going to let it slide. This time, I was going to make sure my story was heard. It was a week after the gala, and the tension in the house hadn't let up. Every time I passed my mother, she would look away as though I wasn't even there, and Elena hadn't called or reached out. My phone had remained eerily quiet, but I knew she was aware of what I had uncovered. I wasn't about to let that slide, not anymore. The house was unusually quiet when I arrived at the venue where Elena was hosting the wedding reception, just a couple of days after the gala. I had told myself that I wasn't going to get involved, that I'd walk away, let them have their perfect day. But something in me snapped when I found out the truth. I couldn't stand by and let her continue to paint me as the failure, the joke, when I had been nothing but a silent supporter. I arrived just before the reception was scheduled to end, slipping through the back entrance where staff were coming and going. The noise of the celebration rang faintly through the hallways, but I wasn't there to join in the revelry. I was there for something far more personal. My heart pounded as I walked deeper into the venue. I didn't know what I would say or how this would go, but I had to do this. For once, I wasn't going to let Elena hide behind her smile and her story. When I finally spotted her, standing by the stage talking to some guests, I hesitated. She was radiant, as always, her eyes sparkling with that sharp edge of superiority. She was talking and laughing, completely unaware of the storm that was about to hit her. I stepped forward, my breath steady, but my pulse quickening. I had made up my mind. I wasn't going to be a shadow anymore. Not today. I approached, making my way through the group of people that had gathered near the stage. Her eyes met mine as I drew near, and her smile flickered just slightly, like she was surprised to see me there. She recovered quickly, though, as always. "Well, look who finally showed up," she said, her tone dripping with fake sweetness. "I thought you'd be long gone by now." I stood my ground, my gaze fixed on her. "Actually, I came to talk alone." Her expression shifted, just for a moment, a flash of something unreadable, but she nodded and excused herself from the group, stepping off to the side with me. The chatter from the reception faded as I led her through the back hallway, away from the prying eyes of the crowd. When we finally reached a quiet, secluded corner behind the stage, I turned to face her. Her smile was still there, sharp as ever, but there was an edge to it now, something I hadn't seen before. "So, what's this about, Hannah? You came all the way here to ruin my night?" "No," I said, my voice steady. "I came to talk about your night. Specifically, what you did to mine." Her expression faltered for a second before she quickly composed herself. "What are you talking about? I don't know what game you're trying to play, but this isn't the time." I interrupted her, stepping closer. "Cut the crap, Elena. I know what you did." Her eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "The complaint? The one that destroyed my career in the aviation corps," I said, keeping my voice low, but firm. "I found out it was you." Her face turned ashen for a split second, but she quickly masked it with a scoff. "What are you talking about? That's ridiculous. I'm not just anything," I snapped. "I'm your sister, and you made sure I didn't get a promotion because of your petty jealousy. You were scared I'd outshine you, weren't you? So you went behind my back and destroyed everything I've worked for." Her eyes flashed with fury, but she remained silent for a beat. Then, her mouth twisted into a cruel smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "You're delusional, Hannah? You really think I'd do that?" "Don't lie to me," I said, holding up my phone. "I have the proof. The linguistic software confirmed it. It was your writing style. You can't deny it." Her smile faltered. "You really want to do this now, in front of everyone?" "I've been doing this my whole life," I said, my voice quieter now, but the anger still simmering beneath the surface. "Being the one who's invisible, being the one who's never good enough. You've made sure of that, Elena. You've spent years pushing me down, and I've taken it because I thought maybe you'd see me, but I'm done with that." Her expression hardened. "You think you can just come here, ruin my night, and demand that I apologize for everything I've done? You don't get to control me, Hannah. I'm not trying to control you, I said, my voice steadier now. I'm trying to get you to see what you've done. You've used me for years, and I let you. I helped you with everything, always in the background, always the one who gave. But you never saw me, and you sure as hell never appreciated me. She crossed her arms over her chest, her jaw clenched. I don't need you to appreciate me, Hannah. I don't need you at all. I looked at her, the hurt from all those years bubbling to the surface. You don't need me, Elena? You don't need the sister who's paid your bills, supported you, bailed you out every time you screwed up? Who made sure you had everything you needed while you stood by and watched me burn? Her voice dropped. I never asked for your help. You made that choice, and now you want to make me the villain because you didn't get what you wanted. This is your problem, not mine. I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. No, this is our problem, Elena, because you and Mom have made sure that I don't fit into your perfect little world. But guess what? I don't need to anymore. I took a deep breath, the words finally coming to me with clarity. I don't need you. I don't need any of you. You've made me feel small for too long, and I'm done. I'll never be the person you want me to be, and that's okay. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm walking away from all of this. For a moment, Elena said nothing. Her eyes were cold, and I could see the bitterness there, the jealousy, the resentment, but there was also something else. Fear. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one afraid. I turned to leave, but then I paused. I knew what I had to say next. One more thing, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I'll be taking back the money I gave you for the wedding. Don't bother asking for anything else. This is the last time you'll ever use me. And with that, I walked away. The following days were a blur. The wedding, the confrontation with Elena. It all felt like a whirlwind that left me standing still in its aftermath. I had walked away from her, but part of me wondered if I'd really severed the ties. I was used to bending for family, to forgiving and forgetting, but this time, I knew I couldn't go back. It wasn't until I got home that I saw the full effect of what I had set into motion. The video from the gala, Rowan's salute to me, had gone viral. It didn't take long for the journalists and bloggers to piece together the history behind that moment. The forgotten rescue mission, the unsung heroism, the sacrifice that had been erased by years of ridicule from my own family. The story exploded across social media. The mountain rescue, the storm, the bloodied emblem tattoo that marked my body like a permanent reminder of a life saved. People I didn't know started sending me messages of gratitude. Some were just kind words, but many were from former colleagues, pilots, rescue teams who had heard of my work. They knew what it meant to be overlooked, to be forgotten, to be forced into the shadows while others took the credit. But it wasn't just the online support that rattled me. The Aviation Corps, the very institution that had dismissed me after Elena's anonymous complaint, had reopened my case. The truth was coming to light. I could feel the shift, the slow-moving momentum of justice, as if the world was starting to understand my value, my contribution, my worth. The media outlets dug deep, reaching out to the rescue teams I had worked with, and soon the story was no longer just about a woman who had flown a helicopter through a storm. It became about the systemic neglect of women in high-risk careers, about the people whose lives were saved without any recognition. And soon enough, the Aviation Corps came forward, confirming the truth. Elena's complaint was a lie. I was reinstated, my career and commendations finally restored. But it didn't stop there. The journalists had dug into Elena's past too. Her polished public image started to crack. Stories from the past resurfaced. Her failed relationships, her questionable ethics as a writer, her tendency to erase anyone who didn't fit her narrative. And then, the bombshell. It came out that Elena had been receiving financial backing from sponsors who were now reevaluating their partnerships with her. The sponsors pulled out one by one. Her book sales plummeted. Her carefully constructed world of success began to crumble around her. It didn't take long for the news to reach my mother. She called me that afternoon, her voice trembling with a kind of desperation I had never heard before. "Hannah," she said, barely holding herself together, "we need to fix this. Please, we can't let the family fall apart like this." I felt a tight knot in my chest, but I refused to let it break me. "Fix what, Mom? What's left to fix? The family isn't broken because of me. It's broken because of everything we've ignored for so long. All the years I've been invisible. All the years you've stood by and let Elena tear me down. I'm done trying to fix it. I'm done being the one who always gives." "You can't just let this go," she pleaded. "Elena, She's struggling. We're all struggling. You don't understand what this is doing to her. She's not my responsibility anymore, I said, my voice firm, and neither are any of you. I gave everything, Mom. I've given you everything. My time, my money, my career, my heart, and I got nothing in return. Nothing but being dismissed. I'm done. It's over. Her voice cracked. You're my daughter, Hannah. Please. I was your daughter when I was giving you money for the house, for the bills, for everything. But not anymore, Mom. Not like this. You made me feel like I wasn't enough. Like I was nothing but a tool for your convenience. And now, I'm walking away. I hung up before she could say anything else. The next morning, I woke up to dozens of messages. Some from people I'd never met, others from old friends, colleagues, and even former coworkers from the aviation corps. They congratulated me, thanked me for standing up for myself, for letting my story be heard. It was overwhelming, but in a way I had never imagined. I sat in front of my computer, reading through the messages, my fingers trembling as I scrolled. And then a new notification popped up. It was a message from Elena. I opened it. Elena Voss. I'm sorry, I was wrong. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I just wanted to have everything. I didn't understand what I was doing to you. You were always the strong one, the one who did everything, and I never saw it. I don't know if you'll ever forgive me, but I want you to know that I see you now. I really do. I stared at the message for what felt like an eternity. Part of me wanted to reply, to throw it all back in her face, to tell her how much damage she'd caused, how she had torn me apart for years. But as I read her words, something shifted inside me. Forgiveness didn't come easily. It never did. But I didn't need her apology, not anymore. I didn't need her to validate me, to acknowledge my worth. I had learned that lesson the hard way. I closed my eyes and let out a long, slow breath. And then I deleted the message. Months passed, and the dust began to settle. Elena's career, once glittering with promise, had faltered. Her sponsors pulled back, her books no longer topped the charts, and the carefully crafted image of the perfect author had crumbled under the weight of truth. The media buzzed with stories of how a family's dirty laundry had been aired in the most public way, and my name was finally, after all these years, spoken with respect. But I hadn't done it for the recognition. I hadn't done it to get back at Elena or anyone else. No, something deeper had shifted in me. I was finally free, and that freedom didn't come from a vindication that the world could see. It came from within. I was sitting in the small office at the Flight Academy, the same one I had used when I first transitioned from flying in the field to teaching. The walls were lined with flight charts, old photographs of rescue missions, and a few framed certificates from the days when I was first starting out. I wasn't sure why I kept all of it. Maybe it was a reminder of what I'd given up, or maybe it was a marker of the woman I used to be, the one who believed her work was a quiet sacrifice that didn't need recognition. I'd changed since then. The woman I was now understood that some sacrifices should never be silent. The truth needed to be heard, even if it meant cutting ties with everything I'd known, even if it meant walking away from my family. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. "Come in," I called, my eyes still on the chart in front of me. The door creaked open, and I glanced up to see a young woman in her late 20s standing at the entrance. She was dressed in a standard Flight Academy uniform, her hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, and she looked both nervous and excited. "I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Voss," she said, her voice unsure. I wanted to ask you a question." "Not at all," I said, gesturing for her to come in. "What's on your mind?" The woman, whose name I learned was Riley, stepped forward tentatively, her hands folded in front of her. "I've been going over the syllabus for the flight certification exam, and I've been practicing everything you taught us in class. But, well, I was wondering if you could tell me how you stay focused. I mean, through everything. The danger, the responsibility. How do you keep calm in situations where everything feels like it's falling apart?" I paused, surprised at the question. I had expected something more technical, but Riley's question was personal. It was raw. "That's a big question," I said with a small smile. The truth is, I wasn't always calm. In fact, there were times when I thought I wouldn't make it. But I learned something important on those missions. You have to trust your training. You have to trust yourself. When the storm is the fiercest, that's when your skills and your mind need to take over. Not your fear, not your doubts. Her eyes lit up as I spoke. "But how do you know it'll work? How do you trust that your skills are enough?" I leaned back in my chair, taking a deep breath. I didn't always trust myself. But the more I flew, the more I realized that fear only clouds your judgment. You can't second guess yourself when you're in the air. You have to act. And when you act, you trust the years of training, the instincts that have been built into you. Her expression softened, a small, understanding smile forming on her lips. I think I get it. I need to trust that everything I've learned will carry me through, even when it feels like I can't. Exactly, I said, nodding. And there's no shame in making mistakes. They're part of the process. You learn from them, you grow, but always trust in your ability to make the right call. She nodded, more confident now, her posture straighter. Thank you, Ms. Voss. That really helped. I smiled, feeling a warmth in my chest. You're welcome, Riley. Keep pushing yourself, okay? She smiled back before turning to leave, but just as she was about to close the door, she hesitated. One more thing. I've heard about your story, about the storm rescue. The pilots who saluted you at the gala? I raised an eyebrow, curious where this was going. I just wanted to say that, well, I hope to be as brave as you someday. You were the kind of person who did what others wouldn't, and that's what I want to be. I want to make a difference too, like you did. Her words hung in the air as the door clicked shut behind her. For the first time in a long time, I felt something stir deep inside of me. It wasn't just the recognition I had longed for. It was something deeper, more meaningful. Riley didn't just see me as a hero, she saw me as someone who had made her own path, someone who had pushed past fear and doubt to become someone who could help others. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the room settle around me. This was what I had wanted all along, to be seen, to be heard, to know that I had made a difference, not by taking credit, but by inspiring others to keep going. I had found my purpose again, and this time, it wasn't just in the cockpit. It was in the stories I was sharing, in the students I was teaching, and in the new legacy I was building. I didn't need Elena's approval. I didn't need my family's acceptance. What I had now was my own sense of self, my own truth, and the knowledge that I was passing on the lessons that had shaped me. As I stood up from my desk and walked to the window, I looked out at the wide, open sky, a world full of possibilities, and for the first time in my life, I didn't look back. A year had passed since the gala, since the fallout with my family. The dust had settled, but my life had taken on a new rhythm, one I wasn't sure I could have imagined before. I was no longer the woman who spent her days in the shadow of her sister's success or her mother's silent approval. I had built something for myself, something that had little to do with anyone else's expectations. I now lived in a small, cozy cabin near a rural airfield, a place where I could breathe. The isolation had a piece to it that I hadn't known I needed. I spent my mornings teaching young pilots survival flying techniques and my afternoons on long walks along the perimeter of the airfield, letting my mind wander. There was something calming about the vast, open skies, a reminder that, even in the quietest of moments, I had a world of possibilities ahead of me. It wasn't just about the freedom, though. The cabin was my own space, my own sanctuary, a place where no one would judge me for my choices. No one would expect me to be anything other than who I was. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally enough. But it wasn't just the physical space that had changed. My purpose had evolved too. I'd started a new initiative, something I called the Skyline Foundation, a program dedicated to providing resources, recognition, and support for overlooked heroes in disaster work and rescue operations. The foundation wasn't about fame. It wasn't about standing in the spotlight. It was about giving people the acknowledgement they deserved, the ones whose work never made the headlines, whose sacrifices were forgotten by everyone except the people they saved. I sat at my desk, staring at the blueprint I'd drawn up for the foundation, and smiled. The idea had started small, just a few thoughts scribbled down during long nights after class, but it had grown into something real. I had already started making connections with aviation leaders, rescue teams, and organizations that shared the same vision. But what struck me the most was the young woman who had written me that letter, the one who had been inspired by the stories she'd heard, the one who wanted to make a difference, just like I had. She had joined the foundation, becoming one of its first volunteers, and had since begun teaching survival flying at the academy. She was just one example of the ripple effect that was happening, a reminder that my experiences could shape someone else's future. I ran my fingers over the papers, my thoughts drifting back to the past year, the decisions I had made, the people I had cut ties with, but none of it felt like a loss anymore. It had been necessary, even if it had been painful. My family's betrayal had been the catalyst for something bigger, something more meaningful. Just then, the phone rang, pulling me out of my thoughts. Hello? Ms. Voss, this is Riley. I just wanted to let you know that we got the funding for the Foundation's first flight scholarship program. It's all set to launch next month. I just wanted to thank you again for everything you've done. I leaned back in my chair, my chest swelling with pride. That's incredible. You did all the hard work, Riley. You made it happen. Still, she said, her voice warm with excitement, I wouldn't have thought to start this without you. I know that for a lot of people, you're just a legend. But for me, you're real. You showed me what it means to push past the limits. Her words took me by surprise. I wasn't used to being called a legend. I wasn't used to people seeing me as anything other than just someone who did her job, but Riley had a way of seeing things differently, and her words meant more than she realized. Well, I'm glad you're part of this, I said softly. It's more than just the flight lessons. It's about making sure people see the value in the work we do, even if the world doesn't always recognize it. I'm proud of you. I won't let you down, Riley said with determination. I know you won't, and you're not alone in this, okay? You have a whole community behind you. We talked for a few more minutes, making plans for the next step. After we hung up, I sat back in my chair, a sense of fulfillment washing over me. The Skyline Foundation had become more than just a project. It had become my legacy, the way I could ensure that the sacrifices of people like me wouldn't go unnoticed, the people who lived in the shadows of other people's success. And then it hit me. This was what I had been waiting for, not just recognition, but the ability to make a real difference, to create a space where others could find their own path, their own voice. That night, after dinner, I sat by the window of my cabin, looking out over the airfield. The stars stretched across the sky like an endless map of possibilities. I no longer needed anyone else's validation. I had found my own purpose. And in doing so, I had created something that could carry on long after I was gone. The foundation. My teaching. The lives I was helping shape. That was my new chapter, and for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. The morning sky was clear and endless, stretching in hues of soft orange and pale blue as the sun began to rise over the horizon. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at the start of a new season. I stood at the edge of the small airfield, my boots planted firmly on the dewy grass, watching as a young pilot taxied the plane down the runway. It was still early, the world around me quiet except for the sound of the engine humming to life. I had spent the last year teaching, building the Skyline Foundation, and mentoring a new generation of pilots. But this moment felt different. Today was a milestone. Today, one of my students was taking her first solo flight, a flight I had helped prepare her for. I could hear the engine grow louder as the plane picked up speed, the steady rumble filling the air around me. The young pilot, a woman named Sarah, had come to me just a few months ago, unsure of her own abilities. She was raw, eager, but lacking confidence. I had seen that spark in her, though, that same spark I'd had when I first started flying, the desire to prove myself, not to anyone else, but to myself. And now, as Sarah's plane lifted into the sky, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. I stood there, watching her, my heart swelling. It wasn't just about teaching them how to fly. It was about teaching them how to trust themselves, how to move past the doubts, the fear, the uncertainty. And watching Sarah take off, her flight path steady and true, reminded me of everything I had done to get to this point, everything that had led me here. I couldn't help but smile. The Skyline Foundation was no longer just a dream. It was a living, breathing reality, a place where people like Sarah, people who had been overlooked, dismissed, and underestimated, could find a home. A place where their stories mattered. A place where they could finally take flight, not just as pilots, but as individuals with their own worth, their own strength. My phone buzzed in my pocket, pulling me from my thoughts. I pulled it out and saw the notification from the academy. It was from Riley. The scholarship program just got its first applicant, a young woman who's applying for a flight instructor position. She's worked with rescue teams before. Thought you'd want to know. This is what we're building, and it's already happening. I read the message several times, the words sinking in slowly. I had started this foundation with nothing but an idea and a desire to give back, and now it was growing. The students I had mentored were already paying it forward, passing on the lessons and experiences that I had given them. They were becoming leaders. They were becoming the heroes they had once looked up to. I looked up at the sky again, taking in the sight of Sarah's plane climbing higher, the wings cutting through the morning light. The wind picked up, the sounds of the field stretching into the distance. I closed my eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle into me. In that moment, I realized something. I had finally found what I had been searching for all these years. It wasn't fame. It wasn't validation from my family. It was this: the ability to teach, the ability to help others discover their own strength, their own path. I had spent so long trying to prove myself to people who would never see me. But now, I didn't need their approval. I had built something real, something lasting, a legacy. When Sarah landed, her face lit up with the kind of joy that only comes from achieving something truly personal. I waited for her at the runway, the pride on my face unmistakable as she stepped out of the plane. "You did it," I said, my voice full of warmth. "I knew you could." She grinned, wide-eyed and breathless. I, I can't believe I did it. I actually did it." I clapped her on the back. "You trusted yourself. That's all it takes." She paused for a moment, looking at me with a kind of reverence I wasn't used to. "You know, I never thought I could get here. I wasn't sure I'd make it. But you helped me see that I could." "Don't thank me," I said, my smile soft. "Thank yourself. You did the work." "I wouldn't have made it without you, Ms. Voss," she said, her voice full of sincerity. I looked at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "That's what this is about," I said quietly, the words feeling like the final piece falling into place, "giving you the tools to believe in yourself." The moment hung in the air between us, and I knew deep down, this was why I had fought so hard. This was why I had endured the years of sacrifice. Not for the recognition, but for moments like this, for moments where someone else could take what I had given them and build something of their own. "I'll see you tomorrow, Sarah. Don't forget, we've got the survival flying drills tomorrow afternoon," I said, turning toward the hangar. She nodded eagerly, already thinking ahead. "I won't forget, Ms. Voss. I won't forget." As I watched her walk back to the office, I felt a sense of finality wash over me. It wasn't about my past anymore. It wasn't about the years of sacrifice or the ways I'd been overlooked. It was about what I had created, the foundation, the students, the future that was now in motion. I turned back to the sky, the sun rising higher, its golden rays spilling over the field. I wasn't just teaching pilots how to fly anymore. I was teaching them how to soar. And for the first time, I didn't need to look back at what I had left behind. I was finally ready to embrace the horizon ahead.